Most women spend their lives trying to be understood, but the shadow woman was born to be misunderstood. She doesn't walk into a room seeking permission. She arrives as if she's always belonged, cloaked in silence and something far more dangerous. Presence. Not the kind that begs to be seen, but the kind that unsettles the male psyche. She does not flirt. She doesn't perform. She simply exists in her wholeness, and that, more than anything, is what disturbs him, because deep within every man lies an archetype he cannot tame, the anima, the feminine spirit that reflects all he has rejected within himself. And when a man meets a woman who embodies that untamed feminine force, not in imitation, but in soul, he does not know what to do with her. He desires her, fears her, resents her. He cannot control her, and that fact alone begins to unravel him. She is the mirror of his unconscious, and unlike the women he's tried to mold or possess, the shadow woman holds up that mirror with unwavering stillness, showing him what he cannot bear to see, his own fragmented self, the parts he buried beneath achievement, logic, conquest. She is not interested in what he has, she sees what he is, and that makes her unforgettable. The truth is this: a man will never forget the woman who made him feel exposed without saying a word. She doesn't play by the rules because she doesn't live in the ego's theater. Her power isn't loud, it hums in the silence between words. It's in the gaze that lingers a second too long, the withdrawal that isn't punishment, but sovereignty. She doesn't punish a man for not choosing her. She simply stops offering herself where she isn't seen. That absence becomes his torment. You see, most men aren't truly afraid of being left. They're afraid of being left by the woman who saw them completely, the one who walked away, not in rage, not in noise, but in dignity. The woman who didn't try to prove her worth because she already knew it. That is the essence of the shadow woman. She doesn't need to become softer for a man to stay. She doesn't dim her intuition to make him comfortable. And when he recoils from her emotional depth, she doesn't chase, she watches, with the detached grace of someone who has already danced with her own demons and survived. Her silence is not empty, it is sacred, and it teaches him more about himself than his victories ever could. Carl Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The shadow woman doesn't show up in a man's life by accident. She is the embodiment of that very unconscious knocking at the door of his soul. She's not the one he wanted, she's the one he needed to evolve. But evolution always costs the ego. This is where the fear begins. Not fear of her, but fear of what she awakens within him. She calls him to feel, to remember, to collapse his false identities. And most men are not ready. They wanted a lover, not a transformation. They wanted pleasure, not in a reckoning. They wanted control, not surrender. But her love is not safe. It is not transactional. It doesn't offer validation. It offers initiation. And if a man is still rooted in shallow masculinity, in performative strength and unhealed wounds, he will run, not because she was too much, but because he was too little, too fragmented, too afraid of his own inner woman, his intuition, his emotion, his sensitivity projected onto her and labeled dangerous. She becomes the exile in his psyche, the siren he claims ruined him, the witch he blames for his unraveling, and yet he cannot forget her, because deep down he knows she was the closest thing to truth he's ever touched. You, to maybe that woman. You may have been vilified for your emotional honesty, called to intense, to independent, to mysterious, but what they truly meant was this: you were not easy to manipulate. You refused to abandon yourself for belonging, and that is the most terrifying kind of woman, the one who belongs to herself. So when he dreams of you at night, he doesn't remember the things you said. He remembers how you made him feel, naked, real, small in all the right ways. You shattered his illusions, not by force, but by being who you are. And in doing so, you awakened him, not into love, but into consciousness. He will tell himself stories to make sense of it. He'll say she was cold, that she was distant, that she played games. But the truth is simpler and far more threatening. She didn't need him. Not in the way he was used to being needed. Not as a savior, not as a provider of false power, not as the one who completes. She was already whole. And the masculine ego, when still trapped in its infantile desire to be worshipped, does not know what to do with a whole woman, because she sees through the performance. She sees the boy beneath the man, aching for approval. She sees the armor that trembles underneath confidence. She sees the anger that is really grief, the bravado that is really fear, the conquest that is really abandonment avoidance. She doesn't call it out to shame, she simply doesn't feed it. She doesn't collapse into it. She lets it pass through her like a wind she's met before, and that unnerves him. Her power doesn't come from dominance, it comes from absence, from not reacting the way the world conditioned her to react, from the depth she had to build when no one came to save her. She knows silence not as a weapon, but as medicine. She knows solitude not as exile, but as sanctuary. And when she chooses to walk away, it's not to be chased, it's to return to herself. You see, the shadow woman does not exist for the validation of the masculine gaze. Her beauty is not for display, and her energy is not for consumption. She's not adorned in obedience. She's not softened into acceptability. Her femininity is feral, sacred, sovereign, and therefore misunderstood, because we live in a world that mistakes submission for softness and emotional distance for strength. But she knows better. She knows true power is not in how much you can hold on, but in how deeply you can let go. And when a man meets her, he is confronted by a kind of love he has never known, one that refuses to coddle his wounds while asking him to rise, one that holds space for his pain, but does not allow it to become his prison, one that invites him into the fire of his own transformation, not to destroy him, but to purify him. But few men accept the invitation. Fewer still survive it without trying, to destroy the woman who extended it. This is why the shadow woman is so often demonized. She becomes the villain in his mythology, the one who confused him, the one who changed after he disappointed her. He will twist her mystery into manipulation. He will reinterpret her boundaries as betrayal. He will reduce her power into danger simply because it challenged his illusion of control. But she doesn't flinch, because she has already buried versions of herself for men who couldn't meet her depth. She has already wept in silence for the ones who only wanted her body, not her essence. She has already tried to be easier, more digestible, more feminine by the world's definition, and it almost killed her spirit. Now she knows who she is. And once a woman knows who she is, she cannot unknow it for the comfort of any man. So when he tries to come back, and he will, she will feel the ache, but not the longing. She will feel the echo, but not the need. She will remember what it felt like to shrink herself for a love that feared her truth, and she will not do it again, because she has become the fire. And you cannot make a home inside a woman who has become the fire unless you, too, are willing to burn. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that he lost her, but that he never really saw her. To begin with, she was not the storm he feared. She was the clearing he couldn't enter. She was not chaos, she was the truth. And the truth does not bend for those who run from it. He will spend years trying to recreate her in other women. He will search for her in softness he can control, in beauty that complies, in smiles that don't challenge his soul. But every face will blur into irrelevance. Every touch will lack the electricity. Every connection will feel incomplete, because none of them will hold the sacred wildness she carried in her silence. None of them will contain the terrifying freedom of a woman who belongs entirely to herself. This is the wound a man carries when he loses a woman of depth. He is no longer content with the surface. She awakened his hunger for the real, and now everything else feels like a lie. But she does not wait. The shadow woman has no patience for the timelines of those who sleep through their own lives. She does not freeze herself in the hope that a man might eventually rise. Her path is not dependent on his pace. She does not postpone her becoming for anyone. She keeps moving, becoming more, expanding further. softening in strength, strengthening in softness, because her growth is not in rebellion to the masculine. It is in honor of the feminine, the divine force within her that demands evolution. No matter who must be left behind in the process, this is what makes her sacred. Not the wounds she's endured, but what she chose to do with them. She did not let them make her bitter. She let them burn away everything false. She did not turn cold, she became precise. She did not close off, she chose wisely. And now, she no longer proves herself. She simply reveals herself, and only to those who can truly see. It is in this detachment, this quiet refusal to beg, to please, to perform, that her erotic power lies. It is not overt, it is not calculated, it is not used, it simply is, woven into her being like the scent of rain on dry earth. And that energy, it lingers in the memory of every man who touched her and didn't know what he was holding. He may not say her name, but she lives in his hesitations, in the silence that stretches after shallow encounters, in the emptiness that follows every conquest without connection. She is the haunting reminder of what he was too unconscious to claim. But not every man is doomed to this regret. Some rise. Some sit in the wreckage of their own patterns and finally ask the question that breaks the cycle. What part of me could not hold her? That question, that sacred self-inquiry, is the moment of masculine rebirth. For in the presence of a woman who is whole, a man must either rise to meet her in truth, or shrink back into the safety of his illusions. And when he chooses truth, when he chooses the terrifying, beautiful path of inner alchemy, then he becomes a vessel worthy of depth. Then, and only then, can he meet the shadow woman not with fear, but with reverence. But make no mistake, she will not be waiting. She is not an emotional checkpoint in a man's hero's journey. She is a universe ever expanding. And if he returns, it must not be to claim her. It must be to witness her. You, as that woman, must never shrink to be seen again. You must never betray your knowing to be loved in fragments. You must never apologize for the way your depth unsettles the surface dwellers, because you are not here to be manageable. You are here to remember that your power lies not in being understood, but in being true. And the more true you become, the less control anyone has over you. That is the essence of the shadow woman, untamed, announed, unbroken, and unforgettable. There is something sacred about a woman who has met her own darkness and did not flinch. She no longer needs to be saved, because she has already sat beside her fears like old friends. She has tasted abandonment and turned it into self-trust. She has wandered through the forests of self-doubt and emerged not with answers, but with deeper questions, the kind that unravel illusions, the kind that silence noise. She is not a fantasy. She is a reckoning. And that is why he will try to reduce her, to label her, to box her in. He will call her too much when she reflects the hunger he won't admit. He will call her emotionally dangerous when her love asks for presence, not performance. He will say she's impossible to satisfy, because she cannot pretend that shallow waters feel like home. But her heart is not a battlefield, it is a temple, and temples do not open to tourists to enter her world. A man must offer something deeper than attention. He must bring devotion, not to her, but to his own truth. He must be willing to feel what he has buried, his grief, his fear, his tenderness. He must stop posturing and begin unraveling, because she does not fall for charm or games or tactics. She responds to depth, to vulnerability, to the slow and steady courage of a man doing his own shadow work. The man who can't control her is the man who hasn't yet controlled himself, because a man who has not made peace with his feminine will always try to dominate it in another. That's why her freedom threatens him. She does not orbit his validation. She is not a character in his story. She has her own plot, her own rhythm, her own mythology. She is her own home, and the men who cannot find peace within themselves will always feel displaced in her presence. It is not her job to make him feel secure. It is his task to build a foundation that does not crumble in the face of emotional intensity. You may be that woman. You may have felt the sting of being seen as difficult when you were simply being honest, of being called closed off when you were honoring your boundaries. of being told you were too intense when you were offering soul instead of surface. But the woman who has walked through the flames does not explain her fire. She simply burns, and that burn will stay with every man who tried to touch her with half-closed eyes. She is the lesson, not the punishment. She is the mirror, not the mask. She is the path, not the detour dot, and though many will try to possess her, only those who are free within themselves will be able to hold her, not in control, but in communion. Because true connection is not about taming, it's about meeting, eye to eye, soul to soul, wound to wound, not to fix but to witness, not to own but to honor. The shadow woman cannot be taken. She must be invited, and she only enters where there is depth, silence and truth, where there is no need to impress, only the desire to be real. So let them say what they will. Let the small minds misunderstand you. Let the insecure mislabel you. Let the unready retreat from you. You were not born to be easy. You were born to be whole, and wholeness is not convenient. It is disruptive. It dismantles illusions. It makes liars uncomfortable. It makes cowards run. But it also calls forth kings not of power, but of presence. And when one arrives, you will not need to shrink or soften or silence yourself. You will meet him as you are, and he will meet you there. There is no greater threat to a fragmented man than a woman who has nothing to prove. She doesn't chase approval. She doesn't argue to be understood. She doesn't dress herself in the wounds of the past and call it love. She arrives sovereign, still and unseduced by the games of false masculinity, and in doing so, she strips power from every man who built his confidence on the weakness of others. She doesn't do this to humiliate. She does it simply by being. Her very presence dismantles the lies, because when a woman no longer needs the masculine to define her, she becomes the mirror in which he must face his own incompleteness. Most men are not ready for this confrontation. They speak of craving depth, but what they really crave is control wrapped in beauty. They desire devotion without discomfort. They long to feel safe not in love, but in dominance. But the shadow woman doesn't offer false safety. She offers truth, and truth always demands the death of something, often the ego. In Jung language, she is the anima made flesh, the unclaimed inner feminine rising into form. When a man meets her, he meets the part of himself he has never made peace with, the sensitive, the intuitive, the creative, the feeling. And unless he has done the work to embrace those parts within, he will project them outward, idolize them, then punish them. First, he will be drawn to her mystery. The way she speaks less and means more, the way she sees what he hides, then he will cling to her, obsess, romanticize, try to capture her through attention, gifts, flattery. But when she does not bend, when she does not soften into his expectations, he will resent her. He will call her cruel for not feeding his fantasy. He will call her aloof for protecting her energy. And when he cannot control her, he will discard her, not because she failed him, but because she revealed him. This cycle has happened more times than she can count. But the shadow woman no longer bleeds over endings. She no longer shatters. For those who could not stay, she recognizes the pattern: men who want her essence without earning her presence, men who confuse possession with partnership, men who believe desire is a right, not a responsibility. She leaves them where they are, not in bitterness, but in reverence for herself, because the most radical act of self-love a woman can make is to walk away from what does not grow her. She no longer fears solitude. She has turned it into a sanctuary. She no longer waits for apologies that will never come. She writes her own closure. She no longer asks why they couldn't love her. She understands that not everyone is meant to hold fire. And she is fire. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that purifies. The kind that melts falsehoods and awakens buried truths. The kind that forces a man to choose between who he is and who he pretends to be. The few who rise to meet her will not try to tame her. They will honor her mystery without demanding access. They will speak with clarity, not calculation. They will not play small to win her attention. They will expand, not for her, but beside her, and she will feel it, not just in words, but in presence, in action, in the steadiness of a man who has wrestled with his own darkness and chosen the light anyway. To those men she opens, not because she needs them, but because they see her, truly, soulfully see her, and do not shrink in the face of her magnitude. But until then, she waits for no one. She dances in her wholeness. She builds in silence. She nourishes the parts of herself that once starved for external validation, and she lets the world think what it will. The judgments do not move her. The losses do not wound her. The loneliness no longer haunts her, because she has discovered the rarest kind of freedom, the kind that comes not from being loved, but from loving herself enough to never settle again. She is no longer afraid of being alone. She is afraid of betraying her own soul just to be accompanied. There is a sacred brutality in awakening, a tearing away of illusions once held so tightly they felt like truth. For the shadow woman, this awakening did not come gently. It came like a storm, uninvited and absolute. It came in betrayals she didn't expect, in silences that screamed louder than words, in the slow, agonizing recognition that she had once called manipulation love, that she had once begged for crumbs and called it connection. And so, the woman he cannot control was not born, she was forged. Every time she was told to quiet her intuition, she listened harder. Every time her emotions were labeled too much, she dug deeper. Every time she was abandoned for her power, she returned to her own arms. It was not empowerment through affirmation. It was empowerment through fire. And this is what makes her dangerous, not because she seeks to hurt, but because she can no longer be deceived. The game doesn't work on her anymore. The breadcrumbing, the maybe later, the emotional teasing that once kept her hooked. Now she sees it all for what it is, distraction from a man not ready to face himself. And she will not participate in another person's avoidance at the expense of her soul. She knows now, deeply, irrevocably, that her value was never in her ability to be chosen. Her value is in her ability to choose. And that shift, that sacred reclaiming, changes everything. It changes the way she walks into a room, no longer seeking attention, but emanating energy that commands it. It changes the way she speaks, no longer just to be heard, but as an invitation to truth. It changes the way she loves, no longer to fix or heal or save, but to witness, to mirror, to challenge. She becomes the woman who can look a man in the eye, see his shadows rising, and not flinch. But she will not carry him through them. She is not his mother. She is not his muse. She is not the container for his pain unless he has built the strength to hold hers too. This is where most turn away. Because most men, though they crave her, do not want to rise. They want to be coddled. They want a woman who reflects their strengths but not their wounds, who accepts their desire but not their damage, who will nurture them like a mother, seduce them like a lover, and ask for nothing that demands their growth. But the shadow woman does not negotiate her value for comfort. She walks away not out of pride, but out of principle, because her soul no longer has tolerance for anything that doesn't meet her in truth. And truth, that raw, trembling, soul-bearing truth, is the price of entry now. She doesn't care about promises. She reads energy. She doesn't care about chemistry. She listens for integrity. She doesn't care about attraction. She looks for embodiment, because she knows the difference between a man who wants her and a man who can hold her. And those who can hold her are rare, because they've held themselves first. They've walked into their own shadows and refused to blame the dark. They've sat with their shame and didn't run. They've broken generational patterns, not just repeated them with new faces. These men are not intimidated by her fire. They are refined by it. And when such a man meets her, something ancient stirs. Not lust, not longing, but recognition. The knowing of two souls who have walked through hell alone and finally found someone who speaks their language not with words but with presence still, rooted, ready. There is no game between them, no performance, just rawness, just reverence, just the beautiful, painful knowing that this is what it means to be truly seen. And it is then that she opens, Not like a flower waiting for spring, but like a sky clearing after a storm, wild, endless, unapologetically. Vast. Because she no longer fears being loved. She fears only forgetting who she became to be ready for it. There is a silence that follows the final shedding, the kind of silence that no longer mourns what was lost, but honors what was survived. This is where she lives now. Not in the noise of validation, not in the echo chambers of the emotionally unavailable, but in the still, vast expanse of her own becoming. She no longer defines herself by how she is perceived. She no longer needs to be softened to be safe. She has become a force, not because she is hard, but because she is whole. You see, the woman he can't control is not a mystery he can solve. She is a truth he must rise to meet. She is the moment he realizes that charisma is not character, that dominance is not presence, that chasing is not commitment. She forces the reckoning, the death of the full self he's worn like armor. And if he resists, if he clings to ego and illusion, she becomes unbearable. Not because she is cruel, but because she reflects everything he hasn't yet healed. In her presence, lies cannot survive. She doesn't expose them with words. She exposes them by existing, by embodying the kind of clarity that burns through performance, the kind of elegance that doesn't need to scream, the kind of passion that cannot be purchased or persuaded, only invited by depth. There is nothing more disarming to a man rooted in control than a woman who does not flinch at absence, because absence is no longer a threat to her. She knows how to be without, how to sit in longing and not shrink, how to feel the ache and not chase. She no longer interprets distance as rejection. She sees it for what it is, revelation, of who can meet her, of who cannot, of who clings to comfort, and who chooses growth. She has grown beyond the need to be chosen by those who refuse to evolve. And that is where her power terrifies. Because once a woman no longer fears being left, she becomes uncontrollable. She stops playing the role. She stops auditioning for affection. She stops dimming her insight just to maintain peace with someone who's afraid of it. She rises not in rebellion, but in remembrance of who she was before she was shaped to be small, of the wildness she buried to be palatable, of the voice she silenced to be loved. And now she is not here to be pleasing. She is here to be real. That reality shatters illusions, especially for the man who wants her body but not her brilliance, her touch but not her truth, her love but not her leadership. To him, she is danger, not because she is unstable, but because she is unshakable. She no longer entertains half-love. She doesn't respond to breadcrumbing. She does not enter rooms where energy feels misaligned. She listens to the quiet red flags others ignore, the inconsistency disguised as confusion, the I'm just busy masked as emotional unavailability, the charm that replaces effort. She has seen it all before, and she doesn't need to relive it to learn it. This woman, this integrated, grounded, shadow-kissed woman has made peace with the men who couldn't stay. She blesses them for the mirrors they were. She forgives them for not seeing her, but she does not wait for their return. She no longer craves closure. She is the closure, because when you meet the woman you can't control, you are meeting the woman who has mastered the art of letting go, and she lets go not in bitterness, but in elegance. Not in silence that punishes, but in silence that protects, not in rage, but in reverence for her time, her energy, her sacred becoming. If he comes back, it is not because she asked. It is because the echo of her absence revealed the poverty of what he thought was enough. And if he comes back whole, not apologetic, but transformed, she will see it. She will feel it in his posture, in his stillness, in his language that no longer seeks to impress, but to express. And even then, she will not fall. She will choose. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses. She knows now, deeply, irrevocably, that her value was never in her ability to be chosen. Her value is in her ability to choose. And that shift, that sacred reclaiming, changes everything. It changes the way she walks into a room, no longer seeking attention, but emanating energy that commands it. It changes the way she speaks, no longer just to be heard, but as an invitation to truth. It changes the way she loves, no longer to fix or heal or save, but to witness, to mirror, to challenge. She becomes the woman who can look a man in the eye, see his shadows rising, and not flinch. But she will not carry him through them. She is not his mother. She is not his muse. She is not the container for his pain unless he has built the strength to hold hers too. This is where most turn away, because most men, though they crave her, do not want to rise. They want to be coddled. They want a woman who reflects their strengths but not their wounds, who accepts their desire but not their damage, who will nurture them like a mother, seduce them like a lover, and ask for nothing that demands their growth. But the shadow woman does not negotiate her value for comfort. She walks away not out of pride, but out of principle, because her soul no longer has tolerance for anything that doesn't meet her in truth. And truth, that raw, trembling, soul-bearing truth, is the price of entry now. She doesn't care about promises. She reads energy. She doesn't care about chemistry. She listens for integrity. She doesn't care about attraction. She looks for embodiment, because she knows the difference between a man who wants her and a man who can hold her. And those who can hold her are rare, because they've held themselves first. They've walked into their own shadows and refused to blame the dark. They've sat with their shame and didn't run. They've broken generational patterns, not just repeated them with new faces. These men are not intimidated by her fire. They are refined by it. And when such a man meets her, something ancient stirs. Not lust, not longing, but recognition. The knowing of two souls who have walked through hell alone and finally found someone who speaks their language not with words but with presence still, rooted, ready. There is no game between them, no performance, just rawness, just reverence, just the beautiful, painful knowing that this is what it means to be truly seen. And it is then that she opens, not like a flower waiting for spring, but like a sky clearing after a storm, wild, endless, unapologetically. Vast. Because she no longer fears being loved. She fears only forgetting who she became to be ready for it.